Chef Leo, the Lion Mancini, ran his kitchen with the precision of a seasoned orchestra conductor and the passion of a rock and roll frontman. His restaurant, the Rolling Spoon, wasn't fancy, but it was famous for its classic American comfort food with a gourmet twist. Leo believed in good, honest ingredients, hard work, and the power of a perfectly cooked steak to soothe the soul. He also believed in the undisputed timeless genius of Elvis Presley. Framed bi-live records adorned one wall of his office, most of them Elvis. His personal playlist, which usually hummed softly through the kitchen speakers during prep time, was heavy on the King's greatest hits. Leo knew every lyric, every guitar riff, every velvet smooth vocal inflection. He'd seen every movie, read every biography, and owned more Elvis memorabilia than he cared to admit. To Leo, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was an icon, a force of nature, a legend who transcended time, which was precisely why he felt a prickle of annoyance followed by a surge of outright skepticism when a new applicant walked into his kitchen one sweltering Tuesday morning. "Morning, chef," mumbled his sous chef Maria, looking bewildered. "This gentleman, he's here about the handyman position?" Leo squinted. The handyman position was for a part-time gig, fixing leaky faucets and patching up the old brick oven. He'd expected someone in work boots, maybe a tool belt. Instead, standing awkwardly by the stainless steel prep tables was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a faded photograph. He was tall, maybe 6 foot, with broad shoulders and a lean build that suggested more grace than brawn. His dark hair, though a little shaggy, had that distinct, slicked-back quality, despite a few stray strands falling across his forehead. He wore a simple, slightly rumpled black shirt and dark trousers, but there was an unmistakable swagger to his posture, even when he seemed a little lost. The most striking thing, though, were his eyes. They were a piercing, vivid blue, and held a depth that seemed both weary and strangely alive. And then there was the sideburns. They weren't mutton chops, but they were definitely significant. Leo cleared his throat. "You here for the handyman job?" he asked, his voice laced with an unspoken question. "Are you serious? Jesse's the name. Jesse Guerin." Leo's eyebrows nearly shot up into his hairline. Jesse Guerin, he instantly recognized the name. Elvis Presley's stillborn identical twin brother. The man was either incredibly bold, incredibly foolish, or incredibly dedicated to his role. Playing Leo had encountered impersonators before. They were everywhere, especially in a city like this that thrived on tourism and nostalgia. He respected the hustle, but he didn't appreciate it. Walking into his professional kitchen, "Right?" Leo said, slowly crossing his arms. "Jesse Guerin, interesting name." Jess seemed to miss the sarcasm. Or perhaps, "My mother always said it was a good name." His voice was low, a surprising baritone with a soft, almost southern drawl that felt oddly familiar. Leo mentally shook himself. Of course, it was familiar. This guy was going for the full package. "You got any experience with, plumbing, electricals work, fixing industrial ovens?" Leo asked, gesturing vaguely around the bustling kitchen. "Done a bit of everything, sir. Grew up on a farm. You learned to be handy. Fixed up old cars, barns, even a few broken hearts, they say." He winked a quick, almost imperceptible flash of charm that made Maria giggle behind her hand. Leo wasn't amused. "Look, Mr. Guerin," he said, letting the name hang in the air like a challenge. "I'm a busy man. This isn't a stage. This is a kitchen. We need a handyman, not a performer." Jesse's smile faltered, slightly replaced by a look that was surprisingly vulnerable. "No, sir. I understand, just looking for honest work. Heard you got a good reputation here. A man can make a fresh start." Leo steadied him. Despite the obvious impersonator Diaz, there was something in Jesse's eyes, a genuine tiredness, a quiet sincerity, that gave him pause. He didn't seem like a con artist, more like someone genuinely down on his luck, but trying to keep up appearances. Maybe he just had a unique style and an unfortunate name. After all, Leo was a big guy, a chef. He had a slight resemblance to Gordon Ramsay if you squinted, but no one ever thought he was Gordon Ramsay. "All right, Jesse," Leo sighed, rubbing his chin. "Tell you what? I'll give you a day's trial. Show me what you can do. No singing, no dancing, no hip shaking, just fixing things." "Agreed." Jesse's face lit up, and that charming smile returned full force this time. "Yes, sir, absolutely. Thank you, chef. You won't regret it." He stuck out a hand. Leo hesitated for a moment, then took it. Jesse's grip was surprisingly firm, warm, and calloused, the hands of a working man. As he held it, Leo felt a strange jolt, a fleeting sense of something, familiarity, recognition. He quickly dismissed it. It was just the idea of an Elvis impersonator trying to shake his hand, playing up the "Maria, show Jesse where the toolbox is," Leo instructed, turning back to his cutting board. He picked up a chef's knife, the familiar weight, a comfort in his hand. As he began to dice onions with practiced speed, he could feel Jesse's presence in the kitchen, a quiet hum of energy. He heard Maria explaining where the leaky pipes were, and Jesse's low, thoughtful replies. Then over the clatter of pots and pans, Leo heard it, a soft, almost inaudible hum. It was a familiar melody. Just a few notes, barely there, but unmistakable. Wise men say only fools rush in. Leo paused, mid-chop, his knife hovering over a perfectly halved onion. He glanced over. Jesse was crouched down by a sink, head tilted, listening to Maria, but his lips were moving slightly, forming the words to "Can't Help Falling in Love." Leo gritted his teeth. Not where the only performance that mattered was the one on the plate. This Jesse Garin character was going to be a long day. He just hoped the man could actually fix a pipe, because his audition as an Elvis tribute act was frankly a little too on the nose for Leo's taste. He was a chef, not a talent scout, and he definitely wasn't looking for a singing handyman. The first hour of Jesse's trial was against Leo's cynical expectations, surprisingly productive. Jesse wasn't just good. He was oddly... He located the source of a persistent leak under the main prep sink with a surprising ease, diagnosing it as a faulty washer with a calm certainty that belied his unconventional appearance. He moved with a quiet grace, fetching tools, tightening bolts, his hands surprisingly agile and strong. Leo kept a watchful eye, mostly out of curiosity. He half expected Jesse to pull out a miniature guitar, or suddenly launch into an impromptu version of Hound Dog while bent under the sink. But Jesse was all business. He hummed occasionally, yes, but it was always soft, barely audible over the general kitchen din. And it was rarely a full tune, just a few notes, like a man lost in thought. Leo still attributed it to Jesse's impersonator persona, a subtle way of staying in character even when nobody was looking. Around lunchtime, the kitchen became a whirlwind. Orders started pouring in the grill, sizzled, and the air filled with the scent of garlic, rosemary, and sizzling beef. Maria and the other line cooks moved with practiced speed, but one of the fryers decided to act up, sputtering and refusing to hold temperature. "Chef," yelled Benny, the youngest cook, his face streaked with flour. "The number 2 fryer's out again," Leo groaned. "Not now. We're slammed." He ran over, peering into the temperamental machine. This was beyond a quick fix. He'd need to call a technician, and that meant losing a valuable piece of equipment during their busiest hour. "Allow me, chef." Leo turned to see Jesse standing beside him, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He just finished recalibrating the industrial dishwasher, which had been off for weeks. "You know fryers?" Leo asked, skeptical. "These were complex beasts," Jesse nodded. "Got a good ear for machinery and a knack for temperamental things, they say." He bent down, his head cocked, listening to the fryers whirring and clunking. He then started gently tapping around its base, feeling the vibration. He had a way of interacting with the machine almost like he was talking to it. "Sometimes it's just a loose connection," Jesse murmured, pulling a small, battered multi-tool from his pocket. He unscrewed a panel, peered inside, and then, with a confident twist of his wrist, tightened something deep within the machine's guts. There was a faint click. Then the fryer whirred back to life, its heating elements glowing bright red. Leo stared. "How did you?" Jesse straightened up, a faint smudge of grease on his cheek. "Like I said, Chef Handy." He gave a humble shrug. Leo was genuinely impressed. This wasn't just luck. This was intuitive mechanical knowledge. "All right, Jesse," he said, a grudging respect creeping into his voice. "You're full of surprises." Just then, a small crisis erupted at the pass. Customer had sent back a steak, claiming it was overcooked. The waitress, a harried young woman named Chloe, looked on the verge of tears. "It's medium rare, just like they asked," she wailed, holding up the plate. Leo strode over, his face darkening. Customer complaints during a rush were like gasoline on a fire. He peered at the steak. It was indeed a perfect medium rare. Some people just like to cause trouble. "Send it back out," Leo growled. "Tell them it's exactly what they ordered, and if they don't like it, they can eat elsewhere." Chloe flinched, but before she could move, Jesse stepped forward. "Excuse me." He gestured towards the plate. Leo paused, surprised. "What for?" Jesse's blue eyes, surprisingly calm in the chaos, met his. "Sometimes a little charm goes a long way." He picked up the plate. "It's a perfect steak, Chef. But perhaps they just need a little persuasion." He walked out to the dining room, the plate held carefully. Leo watched a mixture of exasperation and morbid curiosity churning in his gut. What was this guy going to do? Sing them a serenade? Jesse approached the table. Leo couldn't hear the exact words, but he saw Jesse lean in, his head tilted, his expression warm and engaging. He spoke softly, gesturing to the steak, then to his own heart. Customer, an older man with a scowl, etched on his face, listened, his expression slowly softening. Then Leo saw it. The man actually smiled, a genuine smile. And then he nodded, took the plate, and started cutting into the steak. Jesse returned to the kitchen a moment later, a quiet satisfaction on his face. "All settled, Chef," he said. "Seems he just needed to be reminded of the passion that goes into the food." Leo stared at him, dumbfounded. How did you do that?" Jesse merely winked, a quick, almost imperceptible flash of mischief in his blue eyes. "Like I said, Chef, a knack for temperamental things." The afternoon wore on, and Jesse continued to impress. He moved a heavy shelf unit Leo had been struggling with for weeks, fixed a flickering fluorescent light, and even helped Maria organize a cluttered pantry with an eye for efficiency. Leo hadn't even thought of. He worked tirelessly, never complaining, always with that quiet hum and that subtle, almost regal bearing. By the time the dinner rush was winding down, Leo was exhausted, but also strangely content. The kitchen had run smoother. "All right, Jesse," Leo said as the last orders went out. "You earned your pay today, and then some." Jesse smiled, a genuine, tired smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Chef. It was a good day's work. So what's your story, Jesse Giron? You're clearly not just a handyman. You got away with people. Away with machines in that name. What's the deal?" Jesse looked out the window, his gaze distant. "Just a man trying to find his way, Chef. Been a lot of places. Done a lot of things. Tried my hand at, well, quite a few professions." He paused, then turned back his blue eyes, holding a hint of something Leo couldn't quite place. "Sometimes a man just wants to be useful, you know. Away from the spotlight," Leo snorted. "Spotlight? What, you, a former stage magician, a circus performer?" He still suspected the impersonator angle, but now he was less annoyed and more intrigued. This guy was truly enigmatic. Jesse chuckled, a low rumbling sound that sent a strange shiver down Leo's spine. "Something like that, Chef, something like that." As he gathered his few belongings, Jesse passed by the small speaker near the prep station. Unconsciously, almost as if drawn to it, he paused. Leo's playlist had just shifted to a classic. Love Me Tender, Love Me Sweet, Never Let Me Go. Jesse's eyes glazed over for a moment, a faraway look in them. He swayed ever so slightly, and then, without thinking, his voice joined the song, a deep, rich baritone that blended pacing with Elvis's voice on the track. It was just one word, a soft, almost whispered, tender. But it was enough. Leo, wiping down a counter, froze. He looked up, his eyes wide. Jesse's face was still a slight smile playing on his lips, as if he was simply enjoying the music. He hadn't even realized he'd sung. It wasn't the sound of an impersonator, however good. It was the sound of a voice so perfectly matched, so utterly right, that it felt less like a copy and more like an echo from a lost time. Leo felt a shiver run down his spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the cool kitchen air. He still told himself it was impossible, but a tiny, insistent voice in the back of his mind whispered, "What if?" The next few days with Jesse in the kitchen were a fascinating, bewildering experience for Leo. Jesse quickly transitioned from a trial handyman to an indispensable part of the team. He fixed everything from the walk-in freezer's faulty thermostat to a squeaky swing door that had annoyed everyone for months. He even helped them retile a section of the floor after a particularly heavy pot crashed down, surprising everyone with his neat, precise work. But it wasn't just his handyman skills. Jesse had an uncanny ability to anticipate needs, to calm frantic staff, and even to diffuse tense situations with customers. He moved through the kitchen with a quiet confidence, his presence oddly soothing amidst the usual chaos. The other cooks, initially wary, had quickly come to appreciate his calm demeanor and willingness to help with anything, even mundane tasks, like peeling a mountain of potatoes or scrubbing burnt pots. And then there was the singing. But the humming, the soft, almost unconscious vocalizations became more frequent. Sometimes he'd be focused on a task lost in thought, and a low, resonant hum would escape his lips, always an Elvis tune. Heartbreak Hotel, Suspicious Minds, Jailhouse Rock. The melodies were always perfect, the rhythm subtly precise. Leo would catch him. Jesse would be tightening a bolt on the espresso machine, his brow furrowed in concentration, and a low, gravelly, "Well, since my baby left me," would waft to the air. Or he'd be polishing the brass fixtures by the entrance, and a whisper soft, "Are you lonesome tonight?" would drift over to Leo's ears. Each time Leo felt a strange mix of irritation and growing fascination. He'd scoff internally, still at it. Dedication to the role. But then a note would hit just right, a subtle inflection, a barely perceptible vibrato, and Leo's brain would short-circuit. It was too good, too authentic. One afternoon, Leo was showing Jesse how to properly sharpen a set of knives, a task he usually reserved for himself. He prided himself on his knife skills, and the sharp edge of a blade was paramount in his kitchen. "See?" Leo explained, guiding Jesse's hand over the whetstone. "You want to maintain that angle, smooth, even strokes like a dance." Jesse nodded, his blue eyes focused on the blade. Took the knife from Leo, his touch surprisingly gentle, and began to work the blade over the stone. The rhythmic shush-shush of metal on stone filled the quiet kitchen. Suddenly Jesse began to hum. It was Fever. "Never know how much I love you. Never know how much I care." The humming deepened, a smooth baritone, and then a full, soft, almost whispered lyric emerged. "When you put your arms around me, I get a fever that's so hard to bear." Leo's hand, which had been demonstrating a new grip, froze. His eyes snapped to Jesse. The man's eyes were still on the knife, his expression placid, almost distant, as if the words were just thoughts passing through his mind, not something he was consciously singing. But the voice, it wasn't just good, it was uncanny. It had that deep, resonant quality, that slightly smoky texture, that familiar warmth that Leo knew like his own heartbeat. He'd heard thousands of Elvis impersonators in his life. Some were excellent, some passable. Most were just awful, but none, not a single one, had ever sounded this real. You're good, Leo blurted out, the words escaping before he could filter them. Jesse looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten Leo was there, or that he'd even been singing. A faint flush rose on his cheeks. "Oh, sorry. Chef didn't realize I was doing that." He offered a sheepish smile. "Just got lost in the rhythm of the sharpening, I guess. That song just popped into my head." "P popped into your head?" Leo stammered. "You sound exactly like him. Exactly like Elvis." He watched Jesse intently, searching for any sign that this was a carefully orchestrated act. Jesse shrugged, the casual, almost dismissive gesture. "He was a popular singer back in the day, wasn't he? Heard him on the radio a lot growing up. Guess some of it stuck." Leo snorted. "Some of it stuck? You sound like his identical twin, if he had one that could sing like that." The words were out before he could catch them, and he instantly regretted it, remembering Jesse's chosen surname. Jesse's blue eyes, which had been light and playful a moment ago, darkened slightly. A flicker of something, pain, regret, crossed his face. "Some might say I do," he murmured, so low Leo almost didn't hear it. "Some might say I do." He went back to sharpening the knife, but the humming stopped. The easygoing atmosphere had vanished. Leo felt a pang of guilt. He'd pushed too hard. He'd been rude. This man, Jesse, whatever his story, was clearly a sensitive soul. And he was helping Leo's business. He was a great handyman, a calming presence, and, despite Leo's personal opinions on his act, he wasn't actively trying to deceive anyone. He was just doing his job, and apparently sometimes humming. "Look, Jesse," Leo said, trying to soften his tone. "No offense. It's uncanny. People pay good money to hear impersonators who aren't half as good as you." Jesse put down the knife, blade gleaming. He looked at Leo, his blue eyes intense. "Chef, I'm just a man looking for a quiet life. I've had enough of crowds and expectations. All I want is to be useful, and to earn my keep." He paused, "and maybe every now and then to hum a tune if it helps me focus." Leo nodded slowly, but Leo knew deep down that it was already too late. His mind was already blown. He still believed intellectually that this was just an extraordinary impersonator, someone who dedicated their life to perfecting the illusion. But a part of him, a part that loved music with a fierce, almost spiritual devotion, felt a tremor of something else. Something impossible. Something legendary. He watched Jesse carefully, sharpen the next knife, the smooth, even strokes, the quiet concentration. And in the silence Leo heard it again, a whisper-soft melody that only he seemed to pick up. Not a hum this time, but a faint, almost subconscious, yet perfectly pitched, "Treat me like a fool. Treat me mean and cruel, but please, darling, only love me." It was too perfect. And Leo knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the mystery of Jesse Garin was only just beginning to unfold. The restaurant was a madhouse. It was a Friday night, and a massive catering order had just been added to an already packed dinner service. The kitchen was hot, humid, and vibrating with stress. Steam hissed, oil spat, and the constant ringing of the order printer added to the cacophony. Leo was everywhere at once, barking orders, checking temperatures, plating dishes with furious precision. Maria was juggling 3 pans at once. Benny looked like he was about to spontaneously combust, and Chloe, the waitress, kept apologetically asking for impossible rush orders. 5 minutes on the salmon, 10 minutes on the steak, frites. Leo roared over the din, wiping sweat from his brow. Just then a shrill, piercing wail cut through the chaos. A young boy, maybe 5 years old, had apparently wandered into the kitchen from the dining room and, startled by a sudden flare-up from the grill, had fallen and scraped his knee. He was now sitting on the floor, red-faced and sobbing. Uncoupling the already frayed nerves of the staff, Chloe rushed to him, trying to comfort him. "Oh, sweetie, are you okay?" "It's all right. It's HHH." But the boy only cried harder, his small body shaking. Leo felt a surge of frustration. This was the last thing they needed. Someone get him out of here. We can't have children in the kitchen. Amidst the pandemonium, Jesse, who had been quietly troubleshooting a faulty ice machine in the corner, stepped forward. He moved with a surprising swiftness, his presence suddenly a calming anchor in the storm. He knelt beside the sobbing boy, ignoring the grease and the noise. He didn't try to pick him up or force comfort. Instead, he just knelt, his tall frame folding gracefully and his blue eyes, incredibly soft, met the child's tear-filled gaze. "Well, hello there, little fella," Jesse murmured, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Looks like you took a tumble, huh? Scrapped your knee." The boy hiccuped, still sobbing. Jesse reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean folded handkerchief. He gently dabbed at the boy's knee, then at his tear-streaked face. "Now that's quite a cry you've got there. You know, when I was a boy, I used to cry like that sometimes, especially when I missed my mama." The boy sniffled his sobs, quieting a fraction, distracted by Jesse's calm demeanor. "My mama used to sing to me when I was sad," Jesse continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, almost as if he was singing to himself. He didn't look at anyone else, just at the boy. And then softly, tenderly, he began to sing. It was "You Are My Sunshine," a simple classic tune. The first note, a deep resonant baritone, filled the kitchen, not loud, but with an undeniable presence. It was warm, rich, and flowed like liquid gold. Every subsequent word was imbued with such tenderness, such profound emotion, that the sheer quality of the voice seemed to absorb the frantic energy of the kitchen. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray." The voice was pure, effortlessly beautiful. It wasn't a performance. It was a lullaby sung from the soul for a scared child. It had that famous tremor, that velvety warmth, that signature way of stretching a word, of letting a note hang in the air just a fraction longer than expected. It was Elvis. Not just like Elvis, but was Elvis. Leo stood frozen, a platter of sizzling steaks forgotten in his hands. The sizzling, the clatter, the frantic shouts, it all seemed to recede, muffled by the sheer power and beauty of Jesse's voice. Maria stopped stirring. Benny stopped chopping. Chloe stood absolutely still, the boy's tearful face pressed into Jesse's shoulder, utterly mesmerized. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away." As Jesse finished the verse, the last note hung in the air, a perfect, aching echo. The boy had stopped crying entirely. He was looking up at Jesse with wide, awestruck eyes, a small, tentative smile touching his lips. Jesse gently patted the boy's head. "Feeling a little better now, champ?" The boy nodded, sniffling. You sing pretty." Jesse chuckled a soft, warm sound. "Well, I try now. How about we get you a little bandage for that knee, and maybe a cookie from the nice lady at the front?" The child instinctively wrapped his arms around Jesse's neck, burrowing into his shoulder. Jesse looked up, his eyes meeting Leo's. There was no flicker of self-consciousness, no hint that he knew the profound effect he just had. Just a quiet, almost shy smile. "Sorry for the interruption, Chef," he murmured. "Just thought a little song might help." Leo couldn't speak. His mouth was dry. His heart was pounding. He looked at Jesse, holding the now calm child, and then at his stunned staff. Many looked like he'd seen a ghost. This wasn't an impersonator. Impersonators mimicked. They let code. This was something else entirely. This was the real thing. It was the voice that had defined a generation, a voice Leo had worshipped as entirely strolled into his kitchen looking for a handyman job. His brain screamed in denial. It's impossible. Elvis is dead. He died in 1977. But his ears, his gut, every fiber of his being knew what it had just heard. The unique timbre, the emotional depth, the sheer, undeniable presence. It was a voice that resonated with the very soul of American music. Jesse walked past Leo, carrying the boy towards the dining room entrance. As he passed, Leo caught a faint scent, not of grease or sweat, but something else, something sweet and familiar. Cologne, or was it just the lingering ghost of a legend? Leo managed to croak, but the word got stuck in his throat. His blue eyes met Leo's again, and this time there was a knowing glint in them, a hint of ancient wisdom, a quiet acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, the truth had finally broken through. He didn't say anything, just offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of understanding. Then he walked out, the sounds of the dining room muffling the faint echoes of the greatest voice Leo had ever heard. Leo stood in the middle of his chaotic kitchen, the neglected steak platter growing cold in his hands. The staff was slowly returning to work, but their movements were still a little stunned, their faces pale. Kitchen was back to its usual noise, but in Leo's ears all he could hear was the lingering, impossible beauty of a lullaby. He had just heard Elvis Presley sing in his kitchen to a crying child. His world had just been turned upside down. Leo spent the rest of the night in a haze. The dinner rush continued, a blur of sizzling pans and shouted orders, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he looked at Jesse, who had returned to quietly fixing a broken latch on a cupboard door, Leo felt a dizzying surge of disbelief. It can't be. It's absolutely impossible. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe Jesse was a long-lost relative, someone with a genetic predisposition to mimicry, or perhaps he was an unparalleled voice actor, a master illusionist. But the raw emotion, the effortless power, the sheer authenticity of that voice, it wasn't an act. It was real. Later that night, long after the last customer had left and the cleaning crew had finished, Leo sat alone in his office, the framed Elvis records on the wall seeming to mock him. Pulled out his phone, found an old concert video on YouTube and pressed play. The familiar voice filled the quiet room, vibrant, dynamic, full of life. Then he closed his eyes and tried to superimpose the sound of Jesse singing, "You Are My Sunshine." It was identical. Not just similar, but fundamentally, intrinsically the same low vibrato, the same way a word was held, the same unique blend of power and vulnerability. His stomach churned. "This is crazy," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. "I'm losing my mind," he thought back to everything. Jesse's name, Jesse Garon, the subtle swagger, the piercing blue eyes, the southern drawl, the casual charm, the mysterious allusions to a past spotlight and the desire for a quiet life. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. But it was still impossible. People didn't just reappear, not after decades. Not a global superstar or man whose death had been mourned by millions. The next morning, Leo arrived at the restaurant before anyone else. Paced the quiet kitchen, the scent of industrial cleaner and yesterday's cooking. Still lingering, he needed to talk to Jesse. He needed answers. But what would he even say? "Are you Elvis Presley?" The very thought felt ludicrous, like something out of a cheap tabloid. Jesse arrived a few minutes later, whistling softly. He seemed completely unaffected by yesterday's events, or perhaps just adept at hiding it. He offered Leo a polite morning chef and headed straight for the storeroom where he'd been cataloging inventory. Leo followed him. "Jesse, can we talk?" Jesse turned a stack of invoices. "Of course. Chef, something wrong with the new water heater. I finished the installation last night." No. The water heater's fine," Leo said, struggling to find the right words. "It's about yesterday with the boy and your singing." Jesse's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. "Ah, yes." He seemed to calm down, didn't he? Always helps a child to hear a familiar tune. "Jesse, that wasn't just a familiar tune." Leo pressed, his voice strained. Your voice it was. It was extraordinary. It sounded exactly like Elvis Presley. Jesse gave a slow, deliberate nod. That's what people often say. He didn't deny it, didn't try to downplay it. But he also didn't confirm anything. It was a practiced, almost weary response. Why? Leo asked, feeling a surge of frustration. Why pretend to be a handyman? Why hide this incredible gift? Jesse leaned against a shelf, crossing his arms. His gaze was distant, as if looking through the storeroom walls into another time. Jeff, I'm not pretending. I am a handy man. I'm good with my hands. I enjoy the work. It's honest. And as for the singing, it's just something I do, a part of me, like breathing. He turned his blue eyes back to Leo, and their intensity made Leo's breath catch. You ask why hide it? Because when that voice comes out, people stop seeing Jesse Garin, or just a man who wants to fix a leaky faucet. They start seeing something else, something they remember, or think they remember. And with that comes a lot of noise, a lot of expectations, a lot of things I don't want anymore. His voice was low, almost melancholic. I just want to be, to exist, to find a little peace, to sing when I feel like it, for no one but myself, or for a crying child who needs a moment of comfort. Not for a crowd, not for a camera, not for the ghost of what was. Leo listened, truly listened, and a profound sadness settled over him. Jesse's words painted a picture of a man haunted by his own legend, seeking solace in anonymity. Still, the rational part of him screamed, "It's not possible." But how? Leo finally asked the question, a desperate plea for logic. How can you sound so perfect? And who are you really? Jesse smiled, a small, sad curve. Avation. Perfect. No one's perfect. Chef, just a man with a voice. And as for who I am Jesse. Jesse Garon. That's who I am here. That's who I choose to be. He looked at Leo, a hint of challenge in his eyes. Is that enough for you, Chef? Or do you need more to believe? Leo's mind reeled. He wanted to push, to demand a direct answer, to shout, "You're Elvis Presley, aren't you?" But something in Jesse's gaze, a quiet dignity mixed with a deep weariness, stopped him. Jesse wasn't trying to trick him. He wasn't trying to manipulate him. He was simply existing on his own terms and allowing Leo to draw his own conclusions. And the conclusion, however impossible, was becoming clearer with every passing second. It's enough, Jesse," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at the humble handyman, the man who calmly stocked shelves and sang like a legend, and felt a strange mixture of awe, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of profound privilege. He still couldn't fully believe it. Not completely. His rational mind fought against it, with every fiber. But the doubt was chipping away slowly, relentlessly, replaced by a growing, terrifying, and utterly captivating truth. The king was in his kitchen, and he was just trying to find a little peace, the knowledge, or rather the terrifyingly strong suspicion, that Jesse was Elvis transformed. Leo's perspective. Every interaction, every movement, every subtle mannerism became a piece of a grand, impossible puzzle. Leo found himself watching Jesse with a new intensity, not in judgment but in awe. He noticed the way Jesse held himself, a certain regal bearing even when scrubbing a floor. He saw the slight tilt of his head when listening intently, the way he'd run a hand through his dark hair, a familiar gesture that resonated with countless iconic photographs. Caught glimpses of Jesse's charming, almost mischievous smile, the one that used to melt hearts worldwide, and those piercing blue eyes. They held a depth that felt ancient eyes, that had seen the very heights of human adoration and the deepest valleys. Even the way Jesse ate lunch in the staff break room was subtly different. He was polite, humble, but there was an inherent grace in his movements, a quiet confidence that transcended his simple clothing. He always shared his food, offered compliments, and listened intently to the chatter of the other cooks, never dominating the conversation, but always contributing a thoughtful observation. One afternoon, a new delivery driver, a young man who looked perpetually stressed, scattering vegetables across the floor. He groaned in despair, tears welling up in his eyes. "Oh no. Chef, Leo's gonna kill me." Before Leo could even react, Jesse was there. He didn't scold or offer empty reassurances. He simply knelt, his movements fluid, and started calmly picking up the scattered vegetables. "Accidents happen, son," he said gently, his voice low and soothing. "No use crying over spilled carrots. Let's just get 'em cleaned up." As he worked, he hummed a quiet, soulful tune. It was Bridge Over Troubled Water. Not an Elvis original, but a song he famously covered. The driver, still looking a little shaky, nodded. Yeah, thanks, mister, you got a real way about you." Jesse simply chuckled, a soft, warm sound. "Just trying to help a fellow traveler, that's all." Leo, observing from a distance, felt another shiver of conviction. This wasn't just a good impersonator. This was a man who embodied the very spirit of kindness and charisma that Elvis had been known for. Stripped of the fame and the excess, it was the heart of the man, shining through. Later that week, a local newspaper reporter came to do a short piece on hidden gems in the neighborhood, and the Rolling Spoon was on her list. Leo, proud of his establishment, talked animatedly about his philosophy on food, his dedicated staff, and the restaurant's growing reputation. The reporter, a sharp young woman named Sarah, was taking notes when her gaze landed on Jesse Mixers. His back to them. "Who's that?" Sarah asked, pointing her pen. "He's got a classic look about him, very photogenic." Leo's heart nearly stopped. "Oh, that's just Jesse, our handyman. He's great with machines." Sarah, however, was already walking towards Jesse, a professional glint in her eye. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice bright. "I'm Sarah, with the Daily Beat. Mind if I get a quick quote for my article? You've got a really interesting look." Jesse turned, his expression unreadable. He offered a polite, almost diffident smile. "Oh, I don't think I'm much for interviews, ma'am. Just doing my job." "But you're so striking," Sarah pressed clearly, sensing a good angle for her piece. "And your hair. It's like something out of the 50s. Are you a fan of classic rock? Elvis, perhaps?" Jesse's smile tightened just a fraction. Leo, seeing the discomfort, stepped in. "Sarah, Jesse really prefers to keep a low profile. He's a man of few words, and he likes to focus on his work." Sarah, disappointed, backed off, but not before snapping a quick, surreptitious photo with her phone. All right, she conceded. "But if you ever change your mind, let me know. You've got a story. I can feel it." As Sarah left, Leo turned to Jesse, his expression apologetic. "Sorry about that. Reporters can be a bit pushy." Jesse just sighed, a deep, weary sound. "It's all right. Chef happens more than you'd think. Some people just see things, or think they do." He paused, then added, his voice tinged with a faint bitterness. "Always looking for a story, even if it's one they invent." "But it's not invented, is it?" Leo asked, his voice low. "Your story, it's real. You are him, aren't you?" Jesse looked at him, his blue eyes holding a profound sadness. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked over to the speaker, where Leo's usual Elvis playlist was playing softly. The song was, "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" Jesse listened for a moment, his head tilted. Then he very gently, very slowly, reached out and turned the volume knob down until the music was just a faint whisper. "Sometimes," Jesse said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerators, "the quiet is what a man needs most." He didn't look at Leo as he spoke, but his meaning was clear. Constant spotlight, the endless speculation. It was too much. He needed peace. He needed quiet. Leo understood. This wasn't about proof anymore. It was about respect. Jesse wasn't going to admit it directly. Maybe couldn't. But his presence, his essence, the impossible truth of his voice was enough. Leo was sharing a kitchen, and perhaps a moment in time with a ghost. A legend, a man who just wanted to be Jesse. And in that moment, Leo knew with absolute unwavering certainty that he believed. The evening stretched long and slow. The last of the dinner rush had tapered off, and the cleaning crew was making its rounds, filling the air with the scent of bleach and freshly mopped floors. Leo stayed late, as he often did, tinkering with new recipes and planning for the week ahead. He enjoyed the quiet solitude of the kitchen. After hours, a stark contrast to its daytime intensity. He wasn't alone, however. Jesse was still there, meticulously scrubbing down the oven hood, a task he'd taken upon himself, saying it needed a proper going over. He moved with his usual quiet efficiency, a dark silhouette against the dim kitchen lights. Leo watched him, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. Respect, awe, and a peculiar sense of camaraderie. He still hadn't brought himself to utter the name, the real name, but the unspoken understanding hung heavy between them. "You know, Jesse," Leo said, breaking the silence, "you don't have to stay this late. That hood can wait till tomorrow." Jesse straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's all right. Chef keeps my hands busy and I like the quiet." Paused, then added, "It's peaceful here after everyone's gone. You can almost hear yourself think." Leo nodded. "I know what you mean." Picked up a dishcloth and began to wipe down a counter that was already clean. The silence settled again, comfortable and easy. Then from the small staff radio on the shelf, a familiar melody began to play. It was a classic rock station, a late-night show, specializing in oldies. The song was "My Way," Frank Sinatra's iconic hit. Jesse stopped, wiping. His head tilted slightly, his blue eyes distant. Lost in the music, Leo watched him mesmerized. Jesse seemed to sway almost imperceptibly with the rhythm, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. "And now, the end is near, and so I face the final curtain." His lips moved softly at first, then a low, rich hum vibrated in the air, perfectly synchronized with Sinatra's voice. Then as the chorus approached, Jesse's voice grew stronger, taking on a unique color, a deeper, more profound emotion. He wasn't mimicking Sinatra. He was singing it his way. "I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway." The voice was pure, resonant, filled with a poignant weariness and a fierce pride. It wasn't the powerful, flamboyant stage voice Leo knew from the records, but something more intimate, more raw. It was the voice of a man who had indeed lived a full life, who had traveled every highway, and who was now reflecting on it, all in the quiet of a kitchen. Leo leaned against the counter, utterly captivated. He didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly, afraid to break the spell. This wasn't a performance for an audience. This was a man singing for himself, for the echoes of his past, for the peace he sought. And more, much more than this, "I did it my way." The words were imbued with such truth, such conviction, that Leo felt a lump form in his throat. He saw the subtle gestures. A slight clenching of the hand, a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of the head on certain words, all so characteristic, so undeniably him. Jesse's voice swelled, not loud, but with an incredible emotional intensity. It filled the large, quiet kitchen, echoing off the stainless steel, coating everything in its warmth and melancholy. "Regrets? I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention." He wasn't looking at Leo. His voice was flawless, effortless, each note a pure, perfect expression of a soul laid bare. This wasn't the voice of an impersonator. However skilled, this was the original. The one and only, to say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows and did it my way. The final note resonated, a powerful, sustained delivery that faded slowly, leaving the kitchen in an almost sacred silence. Jesse opened his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability in them, as if he had just returned from a long journey. He blinked slowly, then turned to Leo. He seemed to finally notice Leo's stunned expression. The way Leo stood, frozen hand still on the counter. A slight flush crept up Jesse's neck, and he offered a small, sheepish smile. "Oh," he murmured, almost apologetically. "Sorry, chef, got carried away? That's a good song, isn't it?" Leo could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. Jesse picked up his rag again, turning back to the oven hood as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Continued to scrub the gentle squeak of the cloth, the only sound in the vast kitchen. But Leo knew. He knew, with an absolute, undeniable certainty that shook him to his core. There was no more room for doubt, no more rationalizations, no more mental gymnastics. The voice, the presence, the quiet dignity of the man before him, it could only be one person. He was in the presence of a living legend. A ghost walking among them, choosing to be a handyman named Jesse. And Leo, the skeptical chef, was the only one who truly knew. And in that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of privilege, a deep, quiet honor, to be a witness to such an impossible, beautiful secret. The silence in the kitchen stretched thick with unspoken understanding. Jesse continued to wipe down the oven hood, his movements deliberate, but Leo could feel the weight of his own revelation pressing down on him. His heart hammered in his chest, a mixture of awe and trepidation. How do you confront a legend? How do you speak to a man who had been dead to the world for decades, yet stood before you quietly cleaning a kitchen appliance? Finally, Leo found his voice, though it was little more than a whisper. "Jesse." Jesse stopped scrubbing, his back still to Leo. He waited. "What I just heard, Jesse, that was him. That was him." Leo's voice trembled with emotion. "There's no other explanation. No one else could sound like that. No one." Jesse slowly turned his face. Unreadable in the dim light. His blue eyes met Leo's, and for the first time, Leo saw a profound weariness, etched around them, a deep, almost ancient sorrow. "And if it was, chef?" Jesse asked, his voice low without its usual soft drawl, almost flat. "What then? Then you're Elvis Presley?" Leo blurted out, the name finally escaping his lips, feeling both utterly impossible and entirely true. Jesse closed his eyes for a moment, a sigh escaping him that sounded like the weight of the world. When he opened them, the weariness was still there, but there was also a quiet acceptance. He didn't deny it, he didn't confirm it with words. He simply stood there in the muted glow of the kitchen and let the truth hang in the air. "That name Elvis," Jesse said, his voice soft almost a whisper, "it belongs to a different life, a different man. Almost a man who became something bigger than himself. A man who was loved and sometimes hated and always watched." He paused, looking around the humble kitchen. "This is different." Leo felt a chill, a deep sense of understanding washing over him. "You faked to death," he stated, not as a question but as a dawning realization. "You wanted out, you wanted peace." Jesse nodded. A slow, solemn movement. Pressures they became too much, the expectations, the loneliness of being that phenomenon. It felt like I was losing myself, losing the man I was before the lights. He walked over to a nearby counter and leaned against it, his posture still impossibly graceful, even in a grease-stained apron. "I just wanted to breathe, to walk in the sun without 100 cameras, to eat a meal without someone watching every bite. To just be Jesse, a regular man." "But your family, your fans," Leo asked, a pang of sympathy hitting him. "The global heartbreak, the shock, the legacy left behind?" Jesse's gaze drifted, his eyes focusing on a point far away. "It was the hardest decision, the hardest farewell. But I had to save what was left of me." "For them? For me, I couldn't be that man anymore. I was fading, and I knew, deep down, that the legend would live on. Regardless. Perhaps even stronger, without the man to complicate it." Funny, isn't it? To be more alive in death than in life for some? Leo stood in silence, processing the enormity of what he was hearing. He was talking to Elvis Presley, the king, a man who had orchestrated the most famous disappearance in history, choosing to live out his days as a humble handyman. It was beyond belief, yet utterly believable in the quiet sincerity of the man before him. "And you came here to my kitchen?" Leo asked, a touch of wonder in his voice. Jesse chuckled softly. "Saw the handyman wanted sign. Felt a pull. This place, it has a good energy, honest work, honest people. And that music you play," he gestured vaguely towards the radio. "It's a reminder of a different time, a simpler time in some ways, a time before everything got complicated. You didn't chase me, you didn't ask questions, you just gave me a chance, and you let me be Jesse. I appreciate that, chef." "Leo." Leo corrected, his voice thick. "My name's Leo." Jesse smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes, erasing some of the weariness. "Leo, it's good to finally know the man behind the famous sticks." Leo felt a surge of warmth, a connection forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. He was no longer just a chef talking to his handyman. He was Leo talking to Jesse, a man who, despite his legendary past, was simply looking for a quiet life, a place where he could exist without the crushing weight of fame. "So what now, Jesse?" Leo asked finally. Jesse looked around the quiet kitchen, the familiar space that had become his sanctuary. "I'd like to, Leo, if you'll have me as Jesse the handyman. No fuss, no fanfare, just me." Leo took a deep breath. A legendary secret, quiet understanding. He had a living ghost in his kitchen, a man who just wanted to be useful and find peace. And Leo, the chef who worshipped the king, now had the king himself disguised as a humble helper, trusting him with his impossible truth. "Jesse," Leo said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Welcome to the Rolling Spoon. You're hired for as long as you want to be here. And don't worry," he added, a twinkle in his eye, "your secret's safe with me, but every now and then, if the mood strikes you, you might have to hum a little louder." Jesse's deal, Leo. It's a deal. The king had found his quiet kingdom, and Leo the chef was its humble, delighted keeper. Life at the Rolling Spoon took on a new, almost magical quality after that night. Leo kept Jesse's secret guarded closer than his most prized family recipes. It wasn't just a matter of trust. It was a profound respect for Jesse's desire for anonymity, for his chosen path to peace. The other staff members, of course, were still oblivious. Maria occasionally remarked on Jesse's old-fashioned charm or his surprisingly good pipes when he hummed a little louder, but she attributed it to his age or just a natural talent. Benny still saw him as the quiet, immensely helpful handyman. No one suspected the truth. But for Leo, everything was different. He saw Jesse not just as a handyman, but as a living piece of history, a man who had touched millions of lives with his voice and his charisma. He treated Jesse with a quiet reverence, a deep respect that went beyond professional courtesy, and he found subtle ways to encourage the music. He started playing more varied music in the kitchen, not just Elvis, but other classic artists. Sometimes when a particular song came on, a gospel hymn, a bluesy lament, or an old country tune that Elvis himself had loved, Jesse would start to hum. And then if the kitchen was mostly empty, or if he was engrossed in a task, he might even sing a full verse. It was always organic, natural, as if the music was simply flowing out of him, an intrinsic part of his being. And each time Leo would pause, pretending to be busy but listening, utterly captivated. The voice was as magnificent as ever, perhaps even more so, imbued with the wisdom and weariness of a life lived fully beyond the spotlight. One particularly slow Tuesday evening, a few regulars were finishing up their meals. Among them was Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who had been coming to the Rolling Spoon for decades. She was a sweet, gentle soul, but lately she seemed a little sadder, a little more frail. Leo knew she had recently lost her husband, a man she'd been married to for 60 years. Leo brought her a slice of apple pie on the house. "Just for you, Mrs. Gable," he said kindly. She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Leo. You're always so good to me." She sighed. "It's just some days are harder than others. My husband, he loved this place, he loved your cooking, and he just loved music, especially the old stuff." Leo had an idea. He glanced at Jessie, who was quietly polishing silverware near the back. Jessie caught Leo's eye, and Leo gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards Mrs. Gable. Jessie, sensing the unspoken request, gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, then a tiny, understanding smile. Leo walked over to the speaker and lowered the volume of the ambient jazz, then put on a particular song, one of Elvis's most beloved gospel tunes, "How Great Thou Art." It was a song that Leo knew Elvis had sung with immense passion. As the music filled the dining room, soft and reverent, Jessie slowly straightened from the silverware rack. He looked towards Mrs. Gable, his blue eyes gentle. He began to hum a deep, resonant sound that blended with the recording. Then very softly, Jessie began to sing, "O Lord my God, when I, in awesome wonder, consider all the worlds thy hands have made." It wasn't loud, not a booming concert hall voice, but it carried an incredible emotional weight, a spiritual depth that brought tears to Leo's eyes. It was pure, unadulterated soul. Mrs. Gable, who had been absently stirring her coffee, paused. Her head slowly lifted, her eyes wide. She looked towards Jessie, a look of profound wonder, then recognition, not of who he was, but of the feeling in the voice. Jessie continued, his voice growing a little stronger, filling the small dining room with its warmth. He wasn't looking at anyone, just singing, his eyes distant as if in a trance. "Then sings my soul, my Savior, God, to thee. How great thou art! How great thou art!" By the time he reached the chorus, Mrs. Gable had tears streaming down her face, but her lips were curved into a beatific smile. She was swaying gently, eyes closed, lost in the beauty of the moment. The few other diners in the restaurant had also paused, their forks suspended, listening in quiet reverence. When the song ended, the silence in the dining room was profound. Jessie simply bowed his head slightly, almost as if in prayer, then quietly returned to polishing the silverware. He didn't seek applause, didn't acknowledge the effect he'd had. Mrs. Gable slowly opened her eyes. She looked at Jessie, then at Leo, her face radiant through her tears. That was beautiful, Leo," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Just beautiful. It reminded me so much of my Harold. He loved that song." She gave a watery chuckle. "It sounded just like, well, like an angel." Leo just smiled, a lump in his throat. "He's got a gift, Mrs. Gable." Jessie continued to work, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. He had given her a moment of peace, a moment of connection to her lost love with the purest form of his art. It wasn't about fame or money or adoration. It was simply about the gift of music, offered freely from one human heart to another. And in that moment, Leo understood why Jessie was here. He wasn't hiding from the world. He was sharing his true self with it. One quiet, heartfelt song at a time, finding joy in the simple, profound act of giving. He was still the king, not of rock and roll, but of quiet, unassuming kindness. Weeks turned into months, and Jesse Garin became an indelible part of the Rolling Spoon's quiet. He wasn't just a handyman. He was the restaurant's soul, a calming presence amidst a culinary storm. He would hum while fixing a leaky tap, sing softly while scrubbing down the industrial grill, and occasionally, like with Mrs. Gable, offer a profound, unasked-for lullaby that soothed a troubled spirit. Leo's initial awe had settled into a comfortable, deeply cherished friendship. He rarely, if ever, pushed Jesse about his past. Truth was out understood between them, and that was enough. They spoke of everyday things, the struggles of running a restaurant, the beauty of a perfectly ripe tomato, the latest baseball scores. Sometimes Jesse would share a vague anecdote from his travels, a story of incredible crowds or vast landscapes, always without specific names or places. But Leo knew. He knew he was listening to the most fascinating stories of a life beyond imagining. Jesse found a quiet joy in his simple life. He enjoyed the camaraderie of the kitchen, the honest work, the genuine appreciation from Leo and the staff. He especially loved the peace of the late evenings when the restaurant was quiet and he could sing softly to himself, just for the love of it, without the pressure of a million eyes or the clamor of a screaming crowd. He seemed to flourish in this anonymity. The weariness in his blue eyes began to recede, replaced by a quiet contentment. He looked healthier, happier, more at peace than any photograph of him Leo had ever seen from his previous life. It was as if by shedding the colossal burden of his fame, he had finally become truly free. One crisp autumn evening, after a particularly busy dinner service, Jesse approached Leo in his office. Leo's heart sank. He knew this day would come. Nothing as extraordinary could last forever. "Move on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Where to?" Jesse smiled, a gentle, almost wistful expression. "Just further down the road, I suppose. I found what I needed here. Leo, rest peace. A chance to just be a man named Jesse. But a part of me feels a pull to see what else is out there, to keep traveling." He looked around the office, then back at Leo, his eyes full of gratitude. "You gave me that, Leo. You gave me a home when I needed one most, and you never asked for anything in return." Leo felt a lump form in his throat. "Jesse, you're always welcome here. You've done so much for this place and for me," Jesse chuckled. "And you've done more for me than you'll ever know. You let me sing again just for the pure joy of it. That's a gift, Leo. A rare one." The next morning, Jesse was gone. He left a simple, neatly folded note on Leo's desk. It read, "Dear Leo, thank you for everything. For the kindness, the quiet, the opportunity to remember who I am. Beyond the lights, you're a good man with a good heart. Keep that kitchen singing with deepest gratitude. Jesse." He left no forwarding address, no phone number, no trace beyond the faint scent of something sweet and familiar that lingered in his wake, and the memory of a voice that had once captivated the world, now softened by time and peace. The staff missed him, wondering aloud where the quiet handyman had gone. Leo simply told them Jesse had found another opportunity, wishing him well. He carried the secret, a precious burden, a heart-warming memory that would stay with him forever. Years passed. The Rolling Spoon continued to thrive. Leo, now older still, ran the kitchen with the same passion. He still played Elvis on the kitchen radio, but now every note, every word held a deeper meaning. He knew the man behind, the voice he had known Jesse. Sometimes late at night, when the kitchen was empty and the city slept, Leo would pull out his old record player and put on a classic Elvis album. He'd close his eyes and listen, not just to the music, but to the echoes of a deep, resonant voice, humming while fixing a faulty fryer, singing a lullaby to a crying child, or pouring his soul into My Way for an audience of one. He never saw Jesse again. But once, many years later, Leo was on a quiet road trip through a small, forgotten town in the American South. He stopped at a tiny, rundown diner for coffee. As he sat there sipping his lukewarm brew, he heard a sound from the kitchen through the swinging doors. Quiet, familiar baritone humming along to an old country tune on the radio. It was just a hum, barely there, but it was unmistakable. And then a low, soft chuckle followed by a quiet, contented sigh. Leo didn't go to the kitchen. He didn't try to look. He just smiled a deep, knowing smile and savored his coffee. The legend was still out there, living his quiet life, finding peace in the simple things, offering his voice not for fame, but for the sheer joy of it. And Leo knew with a warmth that spread through him that the king had truly found his way home. Wherever that might be, He was just Jesse, and he was finally free.